All right, today we're jumping right into Zechariah chapter 2. It's this incredible vision all about Jerusalem's restoration. And what's so wild about this prophecy is that it has a dual fulfillment. That means it points to something that happened right away, historically, but also to something much, much bigger that stretches all the way into our modern era. And these two verses, right here, are really the heart of the whole chapter. This is the central promise that sets the stage for everything else. It's a vision of a Jerusalem that's boundless, just overflowing with life, and its protection isn't going to come from stone walls, but from God himself. So let's start at the beginning of the chapter with the prophet's third vision. It's an encounter with a man holding a simple measuring line. But this image is what kicks off a prophecy that, believe it or not, spans thousands of years. Okay, so in the first couple of verses, Zechariah sees this man, and he's got a measuring line. He asks him, hey, where are you going with that? And the guy's answer is simple: to measure Jerusalem. Now, this isn't just about city planning. This is a sign of a divine plan, a heavenly blueprint to rebuild and restore the city. But then there's this really cool twist in verses 4 and 5. An angel steps in and clarifies that even though the city is being measured, it's not going to be contained. It's going to be inhabited as towns without walls. What does that mean? It means huge, explosive growth. So many people that building traditional walls would just be pointless. Now, this prophecy did have an immediate, sort of partial fulfillment. If you look in the book of Nehemiah, you see that a physical wall was rebuilt back in 445 BC, and they did it in just 52 days, which is incredible. That wall was absolutely crucial for protecting the exiles who had returned, and it stood for centuries until the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. But that just set the stage for the prophecy's later fulfillment. See, Nehemiah's wall was only the first step. This timeline really shows you that long-term prophetic arc. It connects Zechariah's vision all the way from 520 BC, past Nehemiah, and way into the future, to scientific surveys in the 1800s, and ultimately, the founding of modern Israel in 1948. So let's dig into that latter-day fulfillment. How did Jerusalem become a city without walls in modern times? Well, it happened in ways that were both figurative and very, very literal. So figuratively, you can see that measuring line at work in the 20th century. Before Israel was a nation, it was an idea, a concept drawn on a piece of paper. International bodies were literally drawing lines on maps of Palestine, carving out the boundaries for a future state. And this political line drawing had intense, real-world human consequences. It all came to a head with the voyage of the Exodus 1947. This was a ship just packed with over 4,500 Holocaust survivors trying to get to their promised homeland. But they were intercepted by the British. And after this tense standoff, the British made the unbelievable decision to force them all back to camps in Germany. The whole world was watching. The impact was just massive. The images from that event sparked outrage and this huge wave of sympathy from all over the world. It was condemned at the UN, and it created this unstoppable momentum that led straight to the UN partition plan later that year, and, of course, to the establishment of Israel in 1948. But at the same time, there was also a very literal measuring of Jerusalem happening back in the 19th century. You had these pioneering British engineers, guys like Charles Wilson and Charles Warren, who conducted the first truly scientific surveys of the city. Wilson created the first accurate maps, while Warren was doing archaeology, finding hidden stuff like Warren's Shaft. They were literally stretching a measuring line over the city. And all of this brings us to May 14th, 1948. When Israel declared independence, Jerusalem instantly became a city without walls. The very next day, the nation was at war. With no real established defenses, they had to rely on something else, the very thing Zechariah had prophesied, the Lord's protection as a wall of fire. And that idea of protection brings us to the next part of the prophecy. It shifts from measuring lines and walls to one of the most powerful, most personal declarations of God's protective love in all of Scripture. So in verses 6 through 8, there's this urgent call for the exiles to get out of Babylon. But then comes this incredibly stern warning to all the other nations. God says that anyone who harms his people is, and I quote, touching the apple of his eye. So what on earth does that mean? It has nothing to do with fruit, I promise. In both ancient Hebrew and Old English, the apple of the eye was the pupil. You know, the most delicate, the most vulnerable, and the most closely guarded part of your body. It's a metaphor for something of supreme value that you will protect at all costs. And this isn't just some one-off phrase. It's a theme that runs through the Bible. In Deuteronomy, it's how God cared for Israel in the desert. In the Psalms, David uses it as a personal plea for protection. In Proverbs, it's used to describe how much we should value wisdom. It's a really deep and powerful idea. Verse 9 then lays out the consequences for anyone who messes with the apple of his eye. It's a promise of a total reversal. Those powerful empires that oppressed Israel, we're talking Babylon, Persia, Rome, and on, they themselves will be overthrown and become plunder for the very people they once enslaved. And now, the chapter's focus just zooms way out. It ends with a vision of a future gathering that goes far beyond the physical borders of Israel. In verse 10, there's this call to sing and rejoice. Why? Because the promise, I will dwell in the midst of thee. Now, this was fulfilled literally when Christ was physically in Jerusalem during his mortal ministry, and it's also understood to be fulfilled figuratively through his Spirit dwelling among believers in his church. And this next verse is where the vision goes truly global. Verse 11 says that many nations shall be joined to the Lord. The prophecy expands to include Gentiles, that is, non-Jews, who will join with the house of Israel and become God's people too. This idea of including non-Jews isn't unique to Zechariah. As you can see from this table, it's a consistent thread woven all through the scriptures. Prophets like Isaiah talked about a house of prayer for all nations, and the original promise to Abraham was that his family would bless all the nations of the earth. The New Testament sees this all coming to fruition as the gospel spreads across the globe. And finally, the chapter doesn't wrap up with a neat little summary. It ends with this command in verse 13. Be silent, O all flesh, before the Lord. It's a call for total, reverent silence. It's a moment of awe, telling all of humanity to just stop and watch. Because after all the measuring and the building and the promises, the Lord himself is about to act.